Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever felt a quiet nudge in your spirit, an invisible pull that you couldn't explain? Not a voice, not a vision, but something deep and persistent, as if the ordinary moments of your life were being gently rearranged, like breadcrumbs scattered across your path. What if that unease, that hunger, that sudden pause in your routine wasn't coincidence at all? What if it was the whisper of something eternal, calling you closer not for answers but for encounter? There comes a peculiar ache in the soul, one not caused by tragedy or loss, but by something far more mysterious. It is the unsettling realization that the things which once satisfied now ring hollow. The laughter of parties, the chase of ambition, the warmth of applause, none of it quenches the thirst that has begun to rise from deep within. At first, this restlessness is dismissed. It is called boredom, burnout, even aging. But soon one begins to suspect that these explanations are far too simple. What begins as a faint discomfort grows into a subtle yearning, a kind of homesickness, though for a home one cannot name. The things that once consumed your attention, new gadgets, the next promotion, a perfectly curated life, begin to shimmer like mirages in the desert. You reach for them, and they vanish at your fingertips, leaving nothing but sand. This is not an accident. It is not failure. It is the slow and steady work of grace. For the human heart was not made to be eternally satisfied by temporal things. It was made to crave something beyond them. Yet in a world full of noise and glitter, the soul often forgets. It becomes dulled by entertainment, numbed by routine. So when the soul begins to ache again, it is not because something is wrong, but because something is waking up. A faint whisper begins to rise inside, there must be more than this, and in that whisper is the echo of the divine. The tragedy of modern life is not that people seek pleasure, but that they settle too easily. The world offers endless distractions and indulgences, and for a while they seem enough. But time reveals their poverty. Like sugar, they dazzle the senses but starve the soul. As the soul matures, it becomes harder to pretend that these things are sufficient, even in moments of apparent happiness, standing on a balcony at sunset, laughing at a friend's joke, receiving a long-awaited compliment, there creeps in a shadow, not despair but incompleteness, a realization that even the best moments are fleeting and no moment can carry the full weight of meaning we long for. This is when many turn to nostalgia. They chase the past, trying to recover the golden hour of childhood or the magic of young love. But the past, too, fails to satisfy. It fades under inspection, revealing itself not as a paradise lost, but as another reminder that something greater must exist. Others try to numb the ache. They busy themselves. They become experts in distraction. They tell themselves that the feeling will pass. And yet it does not, because the ache is not a problem to solve. It is a message to receive. There is a reason that stories of other worlds, tales of distant lands, secret doors, hidden kingdoms stir us so deeply. They do not merely entertain us, they awaken something buried. That sense of wonder, of longing, of homesickness for a place we've never seen. These are not weaknesses of the mind, but signals of the soul. They suggest that we are not merely creatures of flesh, but pilgrims with a destination beyond sight. So when this longing rises, when nothing in the world seems quite enough, it is not a sign of spiritual failure. It is a sign of divine pursuit. The things of this world were never meant to fully satisfy. They were meant to point. They are signposts, not destinations. The meal is not the feast. It is the scent of the feast drifting into a distant room, calling us forward. To feel restless, then, is not a curse. It is a calling. Not all hear it. Many ignore it. But for those who listen closely, who lean into the ache instead of running from it, a door begins to open, not outward, into escape, but inward, into encounter. For behind that yearning, behind that quiet but persistent dissatisfaction, stands the one who gave you that hunger in the first place. Not to torment, but to draw. Not to frustrate, but to lead. The restlessness is not proof that something is wrong with you. It may be the strongest evidence that you are being invited into something far more real than everything you've known. There comes a moment when the mirror begins to show more than just a face. It shows fractures beneath the surface, not of skin, but of soul. You begin to see yourself not merely as someone who makes mistakes, but as someone marked by a deeper pattern and inner brokenness that no amount of effort seems to fix. What once passed as harmless personality quirks or moments of weakness now appear under a brighter, more searching light. A sharp word spoken in anger lingers longer than it used to. A hidden selfish thought that once would have been dismissed now pricks the conscience like a thorn. There is a growing sense that these small cracks are not isolated incidents, but symptoms of something deeper, a disordered heart, a misaligned will, a soul that has wandered. This awareness rarely comes all at once. It does not crash like thunder, it seeps in, slow and unsettling. You begin to notice it in conversations that leave you uneasy, in choices that once seemed fine but now feel strangely hollow. You start to feel the weight of the things you've justified for years: bitterness, pride, envy, not because someone is condemning you, but because something within you refuses to look away. It is not merely guilt, though guilt is part of it. It is clarity, a sense that you are seeing yourself, perhaps for the first time, without the usual filters of excuse or comparison. And strangely, this clarity is not cruel. It does not arrive like a judge slamming a gavel, but like a physician who shows you the X-ray you didn't want to see but needed to. It is not a voice of accusation, but one of invitation and urging toward honesty. You begin to understand that recognizing the sickness is not the end of hope, but the beginning of healing. In fact, the very reason you're able to see your flaws in this new way is because something within you is being awakened to the possibility of transformation. The light that exposes also beckons. Often this conviction begins where the world cannot see. You're praised on the outside but restless within. You know the applause is real, but you also know it is incomplete. Because you carry secrets, the thoughts you never voice, the motivations behind your kindness, the subtle ways you manipulate outcomes in your favor. These shadows, once easily ignored, begin to take shape. You find yourself less willing to pretend, less eager to boast. There is a new discomfort with your own pretense, and a growing longing to be known not just for your strengths, but in your weakness, your honesty, your reality. And what's more, this awakening often leads to a strange paradox. The more clearly you see your sin, the more you sense that you are not hated for it. Instead of fear, you begin to feel sorrow, not despairing sorrow, but the kind that aches to be made clean. It's like standing in the rain after a long drought. You are exposed, yes, but also refreshed. The guilt is not meant to crush, but to soften like a plow turning soil in preparation for new life. There is pain, but it is the pain of awakening, of shedding the shell you once hid in. This kind of conviction is not the same as self-loathing. It does not spiral inward. Rather, it lifts your gaze beyond yourself. It creates space not only for confession, but for grace. You stop performing, you start confessing, you stop managing your image, you start seeking real change. And slowly, subtly, this posture alters how you see others. The harshness in your judgment begins to fade. You begin to realize that everyone is carrying their own shadows, and that mercy, once something you wanted for yourself, becomes something you now wish to extend. There is a deep beauty in this kind of brokenness because it makes room for God, not the distant deity of obligation and ritual, but the living presence of one who sees you fully and does not turn away, the one who convicts, not to punish but to purify, the one who reveals the wound, not to shame you but to apply healing. You begin to trust that this process is not an accident, but an invitation, that the pain of seeing your sin is not the end of your story, but the place where a new one begins. One written not in the ink of perfection, but in the grace of being truly known and deeply loved. There are moments when life refuses to go according to plan. You map your path carefully, imagining how the next month, year, or even decade should unfold, only to watch as something interrupts the rhythm. A job offer falls through. A friendship breaks without warning. A sudden illness shatters your routine. Even the smallest detours, missed appointments, traffic jams, cancelled plans begin to feel oddly significant, as if they carry more weight than their surface inconvenience would suggest. These interruptions often feel frustrating at first, unwanted, even unfair. But over time, they begin to form a pattern, a strange, unsettling sense that something is trying to get your attention. These are not the random misfortunes of an indifferent world. They are more precise than that. They arrive not with chaos, but with choreography. When you look closely, you see that the interruptions come at moments when you are moving too quickly, coasting too comfortably, or heading in a direction that, while seemingly good, may not be what your soul truly needs. There is something about being halted, about being made to wait, to reevaluate, to sit still against your will that creates space you didn't realize you lacked. It is in that space that the voice of God often becomes most audible. You begin to notice that the silence which follows the interruption is not empty. It begins to echo. Thoughts you had buried rise to the surface. Priorities you had long assumed were right start to wobble. You feel exposed, not in a shameful way, but in a way that strips away the noise and leaves only what is real. You start to ask questions that discomfort you, questions about your motives, your pace, your purpose. These questions do not come from you alone. They are seeded by the interruption itself, as if placed there to provoke reflection, not punishment. There's a peculiar kind of clarity that only shows up when things fall apart. When your calendar clears unexpectedly, or a season of waiting stretches far longer than you hoped, you begin to see more deeply into yourself and your story. Often, it is not until the machinery of your life grinds to a halt that you realize how loud it had become. The interruption, unwelcome though it may be, becomes a form of mercy. It slows you down long enough to notice the hunger in your soul. It forces a confrontation not just with your circumstances but with your inner life. The parts of yourself that you've ignored, distracted, or suppressed suddenly stand in front of you, waiting to be acknowledged. Sometimes it takes a divine interruption to reintroduce you to the life you were meant to live. What you thought was a setback turns out to be a redirection. What felt like loss begins to look like liberation. The path you had built for yourself was not wicked, but it was incomplete. It was missing something, perhaps depth, perhaps integrity, perhaps the space for real encounter. And so the interruption came, not to dismantle your life maliciously, but to rescue it from drifting. In hindsight, many of the most formative seasons begin with disruption. The moment you were forced to move, the relationship that ended, the opportunity that slipped through your fingers. At the time they seemed like walls, barriers to your happiness. But with distance you begin to see that they were thresholds, points of entry into something deeper. And often, that deeper place is not outward success, but inward transformation. The real change happens not in what you accomplish after the interruption, but in who you become during it. You also begin to develop a sensitivity to interruptions in daily life, not just the major ones, but the subtle ones. A stranger delays you with a question. A child's cry breaks into your concentration. A cancelled meeting frees an unexpected hour. These small moments begin to feel less like accidents and more like invitations. You begin to live with a little more openness, a little less control. You start to trust that your life is not only being lived, but guided. To be interrupted by God is not always dramatic. It is often quiet, even disguised, but it is unmistakable in its effect. It clears a space that only God can fill. It creates a pause in which the eternal can be heard. You may not recognize it at first, but as the pattern becomes clearer, and as your soul becomes quieter, you begin to suspect that you are not being abandoned or punished. You are being drawn. And the interruption itself becomes sacred. There is a moment when the hunger for truth begins to outweigh the need for distraction. It does not announce itself with fanfare, nor does it demand your attention. It arrives subtly, like a gentle pull at the edge of your soul. You may find yourself reading something, a line of scripture, a phrase in a sermon, even a sentence in a forgotten book, and suddenly, without warning, your heart stirs. Not with emotion alone, but with recognition. Something within you whispers, "This is what I've been looking for," though you hadn't realized you were searching at all. That moment marks the beginning of something sacred, the awakening of your desire for truth. This desire does not come from within you alone. It is planted, sparked by a force beyond you. You could go years content with vague spiritual ideas, clichés passed down through culture or tradition. You could live perfectly fine with superficial beliefs, reciting familiar prayers without thinking, flipping past pages of holy texts as if they were background noise. But then, inexplicably, the words begin to come alive. They seem to speak directly to you, not in abstract terms, but with personal weight. You find yourself rereading the same passage twice, 3 times, because it feels like it's saying more than you first saw. What was once dry now feels strangely nourishing. This shift is not intellectual alone. It is deeper than curiosity. You don't just want answers, you want meaning. You begin to crave something solid, something that does not collapse under pressure. You want to know not just how to live, but why life matters at all. You are no longer satisfied with half-truths or comforting slogans. You want something that can hold you when life shakes, something that does not change with moods or culture. And in this desire, you begin to sense the nearness of God not as a vague presence, but as the very source of truth itself. Conversations that once bored you now hold your attention. A friend shares a verse or an insight, and it lingers in your mind far longer than you expect. You begin to seek out quiet places, not to escape noise, but to better hear the inner voice urging you to look deeper. This hunger may start with scripture, but it doesn't end there. It spills into the way you see the world. You begin to listen differently, read differently, even observe your surroundings with new eyes. Every experience becomes colored by a growing awareness that life is more layered, more mysterious, more sacred than you previously understood. At the same time, this desire for truth begins to expose the falsehoods you've been living with. Lies you've told yourself about your worth, your control, your independence start to crack. The illusions you've clung to for comfort begin to lose their charm. You feel a growing discomfort with compromise, with spiritual laziness, with empty ritual. This is not born of pride, but of longing. You are not seeking to become superior, you are seeking to become whole. And the more you taste what is true, the more intolerable the counterfeit becomes. Interestingly, this desire also brings with it a strange kind of humility. The more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. The deeper you go, the more aware you become of your limitations. But this humility is not discouraging. It is freeing. You no longer have to pretend to be an expert. You can be a seeker. You can ask without shame. And in asking, you are drawn further into the heart of God. Because truth, real truth, is not merely a set of facts. It is a person, a presence, a voice calling you beyond the surface of things. And so you keep coming back to the Word, to prayer, to those mysterious moments of quiet when your soul feels most alive, not because you're disciplined, but because you're drawn. The desire itself becomes the evidence that something or someone is at work. You are not chasing truth on your own, truth is reaching for you. And the more you respond, the more the hunger grows, not in frustration, but in wonder. For you begin to realize that truth is not a destination you arrive at, but a journey you are invited into, a journey that transforms not just what you believe, but who you become. There are times when the ordinary world feels strangely thin, as if some unseen curtain has shifted and you catch a glimpse of something far more real just beyond your grasp. It may happen in silence, when you're walking alone and suddenly feel surrounded by a depth that wasn't there a moment before. It may arrive during music that moves you without warning, or in the eyes of someone suffering, where beauty and sorrow meet in a way that defies language. There's a stillness, a weight, a presence you cannot name, but you know it's not from you. It is not imagination. It is not sentiment. It is something else, something other. This sense of divine presence is not always overwhelming. It does not announce itself with flashing lights or thunderous voices. Often it is barely noticeable, like a whisper in the back of your mind or a warmth that settles over your spirit without reason. There are no guarantees, no formulas to summon it. You cannot predict its arrival, and yet, when it comes, it brings a clarity, a sense that you are not alone. For a brief moment, the eternal feels near, not as an idea but as a reality. You may find yourself praying more not because you think you should, but because it feels like someone is actually listening. Words that once felt hollow begin to carry weight. Or perhaps you find yourself in tears for reasons you can't explain, touched by a tenderness that catches you off guard. These are not emotional reactions alone. They are signs that your soul is being stirred. It is as if some deeper part of you recognizes the presence even before your mind can name it. Something in you bows, not in fear, but in reverence. These moments can come uninvited, even in places you wouldn't expect. Washing dishes, driving to work, sitting in a room full of noise. The sacred is not confined to the sanctuary. Sometimes it shows up right in the middle of the mundane, and when it does, time seems to slow, as though the veil between heaven and earth has grown thin, and for a heartbeat you are standing on holy ground. You do not see visions, yet you see differently. You do not hear a voice, yet something speaks. This presence is gentle. It does not force itself. It invites, it lingers. It waits to be noticed. If you try to grab it, it vanishes. If you remain still, it deepens. It cannot be manipulated or earned. It is not a reward for good behavior. It is grace. It is gift. And often, it is most clearly felt in your weakest moments. Not when you are strong and sure of yourself, but when you are tired, uncertain, worn thin. In these moments, the walls you've built begin to crack, and through those cracks the light comes. You begin to notice that this presence brings peace, but not always comfort. Sometimes it unsettles you. It reveals things you would rather ignore: your pride, your fears, your hidden wounds. But even in the exposure, there is no condemnation. There is only love, fierce and unwavering. You feel known, utterly and entirely. And yet you do not feel rejected. You feel invited, welcomed, held. The holiness you sense does not push you away, it draws you closer. Over time, this awareness changes how you live. You become more attentive, more open. You begin to seek not the experience itself, but the one behind it. You are not chasing feelings, you are following a presence. And in following, you learn to trust that even when the feeling fades, the reality remains. The silence after the sacred moment is not absence. It is invitation to walk by faith, not by sight. This nearness of God is not something you control. It is something you receive. It may come when you least expect it, or it may come after long silence. But each time it comes, it leaves a mark, a reminder that you were made for more, that you are not alone, that love is not just a concept but a presence that walks beside you, calls to you, and waits for you to notice. There are seasons when your heart begins to ache for more, not in the way of ambition or desire for achievement, but in a quieter, deeper place. It is a longing that doesn't come with loud demands, but with a kind of holy restlessness. You find yourself questioning the pace you've kept, the things you've chased, the values you've inherited without much thought. There's a gentle dissatisfaction with the way things are, not because they're terrible, but because they are too small for the size of your soul. You begin to sense that the life you've built, while full, is not yet whole. Something in you whispers, there must be more. This longing is not easily explained. From the outside, everything may seem fine. You are not in crisis. You are not necessarily suffering. Yet there is an emptiness that wasn't there before, or perhaps it has always been there, and only now have you become quiet enough to feel it. It stirs when you are alone, when the noise has faded, when the distractions fall short. And it is in that ache that something begins to shift. The things that once satisfied no longer do. The routine loses its charm. The small pleasures feel too temporary. Even success begins to taste flat. This is not discontent in the worldly sense. It is something sacred. It is not a rejection of your life, but a realization that you are being drawn into something deeper. You may not know what that something is, but you feel its pull. It's as though the foundation beneath your daily concerns is being restructured. You begin to question not just how you live, but why. What is this all for? What am I becoming? And in asking those questions, you sense that someone is listening not as a passive observer, but as a guide who has placed these questions in your heart for a reason. The desire for more begins to reshape what you pursue. You no longer crave only the next milestone or approval or possession. You begin to long for truth that is deep enough to rest in, for a purpose that reaches beyond yourself, for a life that is not just lived but given. This longing is not satisfied by answers alone. It is not quenched by explanation. It is stirred by presence, by the sense that you are being invited into communion, into relationship, into something eternal. And the more you listen to that ache, the more clearly you begin to hear the quiet call beneath it. Often this longing appears in the form of questions. Why am I here? What is my life really about? How do I become someone worth becoming? These questions do not accuse, they invite. They are not demands for performance, they are doors to intimacy. The ache within you is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of grace. It means your heart is still alive. It means your soul has not settled. It means you are still capable of being moved by something beyond yourself. Sometimes this longing leads you into places you didn't expect. You might lose interest in things that once defined you. You might feel strangely drawn to solitude or quiet reflection, or acts of kindness that no one notices. You begin to prefer depth over noise, authenticity over performance. You are not trying to impress anymore, you are trying to become true. There is a slow, sacred shift happening in the way you measure your days, and at the center of it is a longing that no earthly thing can fill. The more you live with this longing, the more you begin to trust that it was placed in you by design. It is not a flaw to be fixed, but a compass to be followed. You may not have words for it, but you recognize its presence. It teaches you to pray, even when you don't know how. It draws you to Scripture, not for information, but for encounter. It opens your heart to moments of worship that feel like home. And slowly the longing becomes a kind of companion, not always comfortable, but always faithful. It leads you, not with certainty, but with trust. Because in the ache itself, you begin to sense the nearness of the one you are longing for. And so, if you have found yourself interrupted without cause, aching without name, or suddenly hungry for truth where once there was indifference, take heart. These are not accidents, nor are they signs of confusion. They are the quiet, deliberate movements of a God who does not shout to win your attention, but whispers to stir your soul. He draws you not with force, but with longing. He invites you not into performance, but into presence. Every disruption, every discomfort, every unexpected tenderness has been, in its own way, a gentle knock at the door of your heart. You may not understand it all, and you need not pretend to. But if something in you has awakened, if the sacred has started to press through the ordinary, if stillness now feels more like invitation than emptiness, then you are already being led. The path may be slow, and the signs may be subtle, but they are sure. He is not far off. He is drawing you nearer. And the response he waits for is not perfection, but permission. A simple yes, a turning, a step toward the one who stepped first toward you.